Blake's hand shook violently as he reached up to the smoke detector in his sleek Manhattan bedroom, the tiny lens staring back at him like an accusation from the one person he thought he could trust. How had his own father, the powerful billionaire Zachary Harrington, sunk to this level of betrayal, installing a camera in the one place where Blake could finally breathe freely as the gay man he was? His chest tightened with a storm of rage and sorrow that threatened to swallow him whole. Every memory of childhood lectures about strength and legacy now twisted into something poisonous. Zachary had always demanded perfection from his only son, the heir to a real estate empire worth billions, yet here was proof that love came with chains invisible until now. Blake's mind raced back to the night he first brought Jordan home, secretly, the way his father's eyes had narrowed at the dinner table, sensing something without proof. That suspicion had apparently grown into this violation. Blake pulled the device down, wires dangling like broken promises, and his fingers curled around it, so tightly the plastic creaked. Was this what family meant to Zachary? Control, disguised as protection? The weight of it pressed on Blake's lungs, making each breath a battle. He had spent years hiding parts of himself, swallowing the truth to keep the peace, to earn a scrap of approval that never quite came. Now the mask was ripped away, and the raw ache of it burned deeper than any rejection he had imagined. In the quiet of the room, Blake's thoughts spiraled into the fear that had haunted him since college, the terror that coming out would shatter the fragile bond with his father, the only parent left after his mother passed. Zachary had buried his grief in work, becoming colder, more calculating, but Blake had always believed deep down there was still love there. This camera proved otherwise, or did it? Maybe Zachary feared losing the son he had molded in his image more than he feared the truth. Blake's heart twisted with conflicting loyalties: love for the father who had taught him to ride a bike and run a boardroom, yet who now spied on his most intimate moments. He sank onto the edge of the bed, clutching the device, the cool metal grounding him, while his mind replayed conversations with Jordan, late-night whispers about building a life together free from shadows. Jordan, who understood the weight of hidden identities, who had lost his own family over the same truth. Blake wondered if he could ever look at Zachary the same way again, if this betrayal had poisoned everything irreparably. The city lights outside flickered like distant stars, mocking his isolation. He stood slowly, pacing the room, each step echoing the pounding in his chest. Part of him wanted to storm into his father's penthouse across the hall and demand answers, but another part, the scared boy inside, begged to pretend it never happened to preserve the illusion of normalcy. The internal war raged, tearing at him until tears blurred his vision. How could one man who gave him everything also take away the one thing Blake needed most: unconditional acceptance? Zachary's face flashed in his mind, stern yet familiar, the lines of age and loss etched deeper since Mother's funeral. Blake had seen his father break only once at the graveside, and even then Zachary had pulled himself together, vowing to protect what remained. Was this protection or possession? The question looped endlessly in Blake's head, fueling a despair that grew heavier with every passing second. He set the camera on the nightstand, staring at it as if it might reveal its secrets. The decision loomed ahead: confront or conceal, but either path felt like stepping off a cliff. His love for Jordan burned bright, a lifeline in the chaos, yet even that joy now carried the stain of surveillance. Had Zachary seen them holding each other, laughing, sharing dreams? The thought sent fresh waves of humiliation crashing over Blake, leaving him raw and exposed in ways no camera could capture. He pressed his palms to his eyes, willing the tears to stop, but they came anyway, silent witnesses to the fracture widening inside him. The penthouse felt smaller, suffocating under the invisible gaze that had lingered for who knew how long. Blake whispered to the empty room, "Why, Dad, why now, when I was finally finding myself?" The silence answered only with a hum of the city far below, a reminder that life outside continued while his world crumbled inward. He reached for his phone, fingers hovering over Jordan's number, but hesitation gripped him. Telling Jordan would make it real, would force choices Blake was not ready to face. Instead, he sat there alone, wrestling with the storm of emotions that threatened to drown him: the love, the betrayal, the desperate hope that somehow this could be fixed. The night stretched long and unforgiving, each minute amplifying the ache, until Blake's resolve began to harden into something sharper: determination mixed with profound sorrow. He would not let this define him, yet the wound was fresh and bleeding, demanding attention he could no longer ignore. The weight of the camera in Blake's palm felt heavier than before, as if it carried the full burden of his father's unspoken fears. He had not slept, the confrontation with Zachary looming like a shadow over every thought, twisting his insides into knots of doubt and fury. Why had his father chosen surveillance over conversation, as if Blake's identity was a threat to be monitored rather than a truth to be embraced? Blake's mind replayed the imagined scene. Zachary, in his study, deciding to install the device, rationalizing it as necessary protection for the family name, the empire built on appearances. The betrayal cut deeper, now layered with memories of dinners where Zachary had praised Blake's business acumen, while subtly steering him away from anything that hinted at softness or difference. Blake felt the internal fracture widening, the part of him that still craved his father's pride clashing violently with a man who yearned to love openly without fear. Jordan waited in the living room, his presence a quiet anchor, yet Blake's heart raced with the terror of dragging him into this mess. How could he explain that their stolen moments had been watched, that their intimacy reduced to footage for his father's scrutiny? The shame burned hot in his throat, making words stick. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked with the raw edge of vulnerability. "I found it, Jordan, a camera in my room, my own father spying on me." Jordan's eyes widened with shock and then fierce protectiveness, but Blake saw the flicker of his own pain reflected back, the shared history of families who chose rejection over understanding. Inside Blake, the conflict raged louder than any argument. He feared losing Jordan if the pressure became too much, yet terrified of losing the last threads to Zachary if he pushed too hard. The emotions swelled heavier than in the first hours of discovery, a profound grief for the father he thought he knew mixing with an anger that demanded justice. Zachary, meanwhile, sat alone in his study, the live feed now dark since Blake had disabled it, his hands trembling as he stared at the blank screen. What had he done? The justification that had seemed so clear last month now crumbled under the weight of regret. He had installed a camera after spotting Blake with Jordan at a gala, the way they lingered too close, the glance that spoke volumes. Zachary's mind flooded with memories of his late wife, who had always championed acceptance, her voice now a ghost whispering accusations. He had buried that softness after her death, channeling everything into control, fearing that Blake's truth would invite scandal, ruin deals with conservative partners, topple the empire he built for his son. Yet now the emptiness echoed louder than any boardroom victory. His love for Blake was real, fierce, protective, but twisted by his own unresolved grief and fear of a world that had once nearly destroyed him in his youth. The internal monologue tore at Zachary, the man who had vowed to shield his son, now realizing he had become the threat. He replayed the installation night, sneaking into the room while Blake was out, the cold calculation giving way to a moment of hesitation he had ignored. Now that hesitation haunted him, a whisper of doubt that grew into a roar. Blake was not a liability. He was his blood, his future. Yet admitting that meant facing the prejudice. He had internalized the same prejudice that had cost him friends and allies over the years. Zachary's chest tightened with a sorrow heavier than any financial loss, the realization that his actions had wounded the one person he loved most. Across the hall, Blake paced, his thoughts spiraling into darker territory, the fear that this was not an isolated mistake but a pattern of conditional love that had shaped his entire life. Every achievement praised only when it fit Zachary's mold, every silence when Blake hinted at his truth. The ache deepened into a longing for the father who had once carried him on his shoulders, laughing under summer skies, now replaced by a stranger capable of such invasion. Jordan pulled him close, offering words of support, but Blake felt the distance growing inside himself, the internal battle between forgiveness and self-preservation intensifying with every heartbeat. He questioned his own worth, wondering if he deserved the secrecy, if coming out had always been the sin that justified the camera. The night wore on, emotions layering one upon another, until Blake's resolve cracked under the pressure of unspoken words. He knew the confrontation was inevitable, yet the prospect filled him with a dread that clawed at his soul. Zachary, in his study, poured another drink, the liquid burning like the guilt that consumed him. Both men lay awake that night, separated by walls and secrets, their hearts breaking in parallel, the bond between them stretched to its limit. The city hummed indifferently below, while inside the penthouse the storm of feelings built toward an explosion neither could yet foresee. Blake's love for his father warred with his need for autonomy, creating a turmoil so profound it left him gasping for air. Zachary's regret began to morph into a desperate hope for redemption, but the path forward remained shrouded in fear. The emotional weight pressed down harder than before, each passing hour amplifying the silent cries of two men trapped in a web of their own making. Blake's anger had evolved overnight into a hollow ache that echoed through every corner of his being, the camera, now hidden in a drawer like a relic of shattered trust. He replayed the discovery in his mind, the lens cold and judgmental, mirroring the way Zachary had always viewed anything outside his rigid vision of success. The internal conflict raged fiercer, Now the son who idolized his father clashing with a man who refused to shrink himself anymore. Jordan sensed the shift, staying close, offering quiet strength, but Blake felt the guilt of burdening him with his family fracture. How could he ask Jordan to wait while he unraveled the threads of his identity woven so tightly with Zachary's expectations? The sorrow deepened into a profound loneliness, even in the presence of love, because the wound cut to the core of who Blake believed he was worthy of being loved fully. Zachary could not shake the image of the disabled feed, his mind tormenting him with what Blake must be feeling, the betrayal that Zachary himself had inflicted. He had justified the camera as a father's duty to guide his son away from choices that could destroy the legacy built through decades of sacrifice. Yet now the truth stared back, Zachary's own fear of vulnerability projected onto Blake, the same fear that had kept him distant since his wife's death. The grief he had suppressed resurfaced in waves, each one heavier, reminding him of promises made at her bedside to protect their son at all costs. But protection had become prison, and Zachary's heart fractured under the realization. He paced his study, the city's skyline mocking his isolation, the empire suddenly meaningless without the son who was meant to inherit it. Blake, meanwhile, stood before the mirror, searching his reflection for the man he wanted to become, the one unafraid to claim his love for Jordan without apology. The internal monologue grew more turbulent, memories of childhood vacations where Zachary had drilled lessons of strength, now tainted by the knowledge that strength for his father meant conformity. Blake felt the pull of loyalty tearing him apart, the desire to forgive warring with the need to demand respect. When he finally dialed his father's number, the line felt like a bridge over an abyss. Zachary answered on the first ring, his voice strained with emotions he struggled to contain. The conversation began, haltingly, accusations flying like daggers, Blake voicing the hurt that had simmered for years, Zachary defending his actions with justifications that rang hollow even to himself. The exchange escalated, emotions raw and unfiltered, Blake pouring out years of suppressed identity, the fear of rejection that had kept him silent. Zachary listened, his own thoughts, a whirlwind of regret and defensiveness, the love he felt for Blake clashing with the societal pressures that had shaped his worldview. The call ended in tense silence, neither man yielding, yet both changed by the honesty that had finally broken through. Blake hung up, his body trembling with the release of long-held secrets, the emotional intensity leaving him drained yet strangely alive. Zachary sat motionless, the phone still in hand, the weight of his son's pain crushing him in ways no business failure ever had. The bond between them hung by a thread stretched thin by misunderstanding, but alive with the possibility of repair. Blake's mind raced with the implications of full disclosure, the freedom it promised, and the losses it might bring. He turned to Jordan, seeking solace in their connection, the love there, a beacon amid the chaos, yet even that joy carried shadows of doubt. The night brought no peace, only deeper introspection, the internal conflicts layering upon one another until sleep came in fitful bursts. Zachary wandered the halls of the penthouse, stopping at Blake's door, the urge to knock, overwhelming yet restrained by shame. The distance between them felt vast, yet the shared blood pulled them toward an inevitable reckoning. Emotions swelled to new heights, sorrow mingling with faint hope, anger giving way to vulnerability. Blake lay awake, questioning every choice that had led to this moment, his heart aching for the father he still loved despite everything. Zachary confronted his reflection in the mirror, seeing not the billionaire, but the flawed man whose fear had nearly cost him his son. The story of their fractured relationship unfolded in silent monologues across the night, each word unspoken, carrying the power to heal or destroy. The confrontation erupted the next morning in Zachary's study, sunlight streaming through floor to ceiling windows, illuminating the raw faces of father and son. Blake slammed the camera onto the desk, his voice steady, yet laced with a tremor of accumulated pain. "I trusted you, Dad, and you treated me like a problem to be fixed." Zachary recoiled internally, the words striking deeper than any boardroom loss, the love he held for Blake, now a source of torment rather than strength. His mind flooded with justifications that dissolved under the glare of his son's gaze, the fear of losing him forever overriding every defense. Blake paced the room, his internal world a tempest of betrayal, and longing, the man who had hidden for so long now demanding to be seen. He spoke of nights spent wondering if his truth would end a relationship that defined his world, the ache of loving a father who might never accept the whole of him. Zachary listened, his chest constricting with a grief heavier than the day he buried his wife, the realization that his control had stemmed from terror of repeating past losses. He confessed fragments of his own youth pressures from his family that had taught him vulnerability was weakness, the same lessons he had passed on unwittingly. The dialogue crackled with tension, misunderstandings unraveling in real time, Blake accusing Zachary of prioritizing the empire over blood, Zachary countering with pleas rooted in a desperate desire to shield his son from a cruel world. Yet beneath the anger flowed an undercurrent of love, both men feeling it pull them despite the chasm. Blake felt the emotional weight intensify the sorrow for lost years, mixing with a fragile hope that this honesty might bridge the gap. Jordan waited outside the door, his support unwavering, yet Blake carried the burden alone in that moment, the internal conflict peaking as he weighed forgiveness against self-respect. Zachary's thoughts spiraled into self-recrimination, the camera a symbol of his failure. As a parent, the man who had built fortunes now reduced to begging for another chance. The argument ebbed into silence, heavy with unsaid apologies, the air thick with the scent of coffee and regret. Blake turned away, his shoulders slumping under the exhaustion of truth, telling the love for his father a constant ache that refused to fade. Zachary reached out, then withdrew, the gesture unfinished like their relationship itself. The exchange left both men altered, the emotional intensity soaring to levels that left them breathless, the bond tested but not yet broken. Blake walked out, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, the path ahead unclear yet illuminated by the courage he had found. Zachary sank into his chair, the solitude amplifying the depth of his remorse, the decision to change no longer optional but essential. The day stretched long, each hour deepening the introspection that would shape their futures. Isolation wrapped around Blake like a shroud in the days that followed the confrontation, his apartment a sanctuary that now felt like a prison of memories. The internal monologues grew relentless, replaying every word, every glance from Zachary, the love that persisted despite the wound, refusing to let him move forward easily. He questioned his identity anew, wondering if the years of hiding had warped his sense of self, the joy with Jordan now tinged with the fear that family ties might demand sacrifice. Zachary's silence after the argument only amplified the void. Blake felt the absence of his father's voice a heavier blow than the camera itself. In quiet moments, Blake allowed himself to grieve the childhood illusions, the hero father now revealed as human, flawed and afraid. The emotional layers thickened, despair mingling with resilience, as he considered the life he wanted, one where love for Jordan did not require apology. Jordan offered patience, his own past scars making him a mirror for Blake's turmoil. Yet the weight Blake carried threatened to overwhelm even their bond. Zachary, meanwhile, retreated into his work, the empire a distraction that failed to silence the inner voice accusing him of betrayal. His thoughts turned darker, reflecting on the legacy he had built, wondering if it was worth the cost of his son's trust. The grief for his wife resurfaced, sharper, now intertwined with the fear of losing Blake too. He replayed the confrontation, analyzing his defenses, seeing them for the cowardice they were. The decision loomed larger each day, the choice between old ways and a new path fraught with uncertainty. Blake received a message from Zachary, a simple plea for time that stirred conflicting emotions, hope warring with lingering hurt. The internal conflict reached new depths, Blake's heart torn between the pull of blood and the need for autonomy. Nights brought vivid dreams of reconciliation, shattered by waking reality, the ache deepening into a profound longing for connection. Zachary visited the family plot, speaking to his wife's memory, seeking guidance, the emotional catharsis leaving him raw and determined. The distance between father and son stretched, yet the invisible thread of love held, straining under the pressure. Blake confided in Jordan, the conversation a release that lightened the load slightly, yet the core wound remained tender. The emotional intensity built relentlessly, each internal battle forging strength from pain. Zachary drafted letters he never sent, words of apology, heavy with the weight of years unspoken. The story of their separation unfolded in parallel, hearts beating with the same rhythm of regret and yearning. Blake stood on the balcony staring at the city, the vastness mirroring his inner landscape, the decision to reach out or wait hanging in the balance. The days blurred into a tapestry of feeling, each thread stronger, more vivid than the last. Blake's breaking point arrived during a stormy evening when Jordan's words of unwavering support cracked open the dam of suppressed emotions. He collapsed into Jordan's arms, the tears flowing freely as the full magnitude of his loss and gain crashed over him, the love for his father a force that could no longer be denied nor easily reconciled. The internal monologue surged to overwhelming heights, questioning if sacrifice was the price of peace or if true growth demanded standing firm. Jordan shared his own story of family rejection, the parallels deepening Blake's empathy and resolve. Meanwhile, Zachary faced a crisis of his own, a business deal threatened by rumors of family discord, forcing him to confront the consequences of his actions. His mind raced with the realization that control had cost him more than privacy, it had cost authenticity. He reached for the phone, dialing Blake's number, the call a leap into vulnerability. The conversation unfolded, haltingly, emotions raw. Zachary admitting his fear, his love, his failure. Blake listened, the words piercing the armor. He had built the sorrow, transforming into a tentative bridge. The exchange revealed layers of mutual pain, the emotional peak, leaving both men exposed and transformed. Jordan stood by Blake's side, a silent pillar, the trio bound by the unfolding drama. Zachary proposed a meeting, neutral ground, the offer carrying the weight of potential redemption. Blake agreed, his heart pounding with a mix of dread and hope, the internal conflict resolving into cautious optimism. The night ended with quiet reflection, the heavier emotions settling into a profound sense of possibility. Zachary arrived at the cafe, first his hands unsteady, the regret of months distilled into the single moment. Blake entered with Jordan, the sight of his son evoking a swell of love, so intense it nearly brought him to his knees. The dialogue flowed with honesty previously unimaginable. Zachary laying bare his grief, his mistakes, his unwavering pride in Blake despite everything. Blake responded with his own truths, the pain, the growth, the love that endured. The emotional current ran deep, misunderstandings dissolving in the face of shared humanity. Jordan witnessed the healing, offering words that bridged remaining gaps. Zachary's decision crystallized in that hour, acceptance over control, the empire secondary to family. The conversation stretched into hours, tears and laughter mingling, the catharsis profound. Blake felt the burden lift, the internal storms calming into clarity. They left the cafe together, the bond renewed, stronger for the trials. In the sunlit living room of the penthouse, the three men stood united, Zachary pulling Blake into an embrace that spoke volumes of forgiveness and renewal. The journey had tested them all, yet emerged with deeper understanding, the love between father and son unbreakable, despite the camera that had once threatened to sever it. Jordan smiled, the circle complete. Zachary's choice to dismantle every hidden device symbolized his commitment to trust. Blake felt whole, his identity celebrated, not surveilled. The family moved forward, the past a lesson, the future bright with possibility. Can a parent's love truly overcome the shadows of prejudice, or does the camera's betrayal leave scars too deep to heal? True or false?